Next, from the City Club of Chicago, we hear from David Axelrod, who served for years as a chief advisor to President Obama. Mr. Axelrod, who is now with the University of Chicago, discusses the current political landscape and what he sees as the future struggles over the implementation of the president's healthcare reforms. This runs about 40 minutes.
Well, this will be a very short introduction because you all know who he is. I, of course, first met him when he came out to Governor State University where I used to work, and there was a guy named Ciccone who was the big dog, and David was working with Ciccone. And then, you know, I don't know what's happened to David since then, but all this accolades, now, David, you may disagree with this, but all those accolades that you achieved, rightfully so, nothing in my mind could ever beat what you did in 1984, because you got Illinois voters to vote for Ronald Reagan for president and Paul Simon for U.S. Senator, and that beats anything that the Odd Couple ever did in their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, David Axelrod.
Thank you, Paul and Jay, the Barnum and Bailey of public affairs. Just can we take a minute? Is there anyone who hasn't been introduced yet? I want to give you your chance. But what Paul said is absolutely true. It's always a homecoming, these events. And these guys have really revitalized this club. But the club reflects the nature of Chicago. When I was in Washington, I always referred to myself as a Chicagoan on assignment, because this is always home for me, and coming home means so much to me because this is a great city. I always say it's a big city with a small town sensibility, a small town sense of community, and in this room you can feel that. And as I look around the room, there literally are people from every phase of my life. I was walking out the door to go to the restroom, and I ran into Tom Hardy, my old colleague from the Tribune, who we've worked together first in 1976, and I see Eric Zorn sitting over here, and all my old colleagues from AKPD and ASGK are here. Betty Lou Saltzman sitting here, who is one of my dear friends, but also famous for having been the person who introduced me to Barack Obama. I've told this story 100 times, but it's so good I'll tell it again. She called me and said, I just met this is 1992, this very extraordinary young man, and I think you have to meet him too. And I said, I'm happy to meet anybody you want me to meet, but why do you think I have to meet him? She said, I have a feeling he could be president of the United States someday. Right there, Betty Lou. So if you're going to the track, take Betty Lou. Take Betty Lou with you. Skinny, I want to tell you that it's not going to take much to get me to do whatever you want me to do for the Special Olympics. And I was with Justice Burke yesterday, and let me repeat what I said. I can speak to this from the standpoint of a parent who has a child who's participated year after year in the Special Olympics. And nothing confers more dignity and joy than that program, and it's touched countless people, not just here, but all over Illinois and the world, and I can't express my gratitude enough for it. So sign me up for anything, which you normally do anyway, but and I do remember that $100, but I'm looking at Tom Quinn, and I must say I did a couple of Quinn campaigns too, and those actually cost me money. So yes. Yeah, but Larry Walsh, we were reminiscing. He, of course, was a poker playing partner of the president's down in Springfield, and in 2007, he participated in a video that we used in Iowa, and he was in there along with Kirk Dillard, which just about ended Kirk's political career. He's just recovering from that now. But we were deeply appreciative for that. Thank you. I've been traveling a lot. I am choked up to see you all, but I've also been traveling a lot, so I apologize for that. I did actually expect, I didn't realize you had all these events going this week. I kind of thought that I would be displaced by, Coach Q or Jonathan Tays or even the equipment manager from the Blackhawks would be a bigger draw right now. But we're really proud of them. They represent this community too. So. I should point out also that my colleagues from the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago are here, but I'm going to save some remarks about them for the end. I thought I'd just talk. This has been an incredibly momentous week in terms of politics and public affairs, in part because of the Supreme Court. We saw a couple of landmark rulings from the court. The first on the Voting Rights Act. And that was a disappointment to see the kind of guts of that act set aside because, I went through a campaign in 2012 and we spent much of 2011 trying to repel efforts to shrink the franchise, not just through voter ID laws, but shrink the number of days people had to vote in states that had early voting. We saw an election in which, we had the spectacle of people waiting 7 hours in some cases to vote, something we should never see in the United States of America, a country that is, an example to the world. So this was a setback, and it's going to require new vigilance in terms of, we repelled a lot of those efforts, some through legal channels, and yes, the Voting Rights Act factored into that in some cases. But in other cases, we just had to organize harder and help people through the process, and now that's going to require more. But, I would hope, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we can come together around the ideal that in the United States of America, everybody who's qualified to vote should vote. We want that. That's something we should aim for. And the President's impaneled this panel to try and develop approaches to encourage that, discourage the kinds of problems that we saw in the past. Now, the God's honest truth is there may be political impediments to getting some of that stuff done because I think that the Republican Party sees some advantage given their demographic base, which is older, whiter, in shrinking the number of people who participate. Democratic Party has the goal of expanding the number of people who participate, and so it's not going to be easy to come to terms around solutions, but it is a real concern. It's a real concern. I mean, if we believe we are who we say we are, then we ought to make sure that everybody who's qualified to vote has the opportunity to do that. Second ruling, of course, was different, which was DOMA, and these rulings around same-sex marriage. And the DOMA ruling was a big step forward, not just because it invalidated that law and cleared the way for the federal government to recognize marriages that are recognized by states, that are sanctioned by states, but also because of the language that was used in that decision that could pave the way for further challenges to restrictions on same-sex marriage. But what it did do, President Cullerton, I know you've already acted on this, it does put pressure back on the states. What's very clear from these rulings is the Supreme Court says it is a state matter. I apologize. That marriage is a state matter, and that and has thrown the ball back to the states, at least for now. We know in the Illinois House we haven't yet had a vote on same-sex marriage. It passed out of the state Senate, and I think there's going to be renewed effort and renewed pressure for such a vote. 13 states now, with California, whose same-sex marriage law was embraced by the Supreme Court yesterday, or the way was cleared for it, became the 13th state. Illinois should be the 14th state, and one hopes that sometime soon there'll be a vote in the Illinois House. And I think that, let me just say as an aside on that, that one of the difficulties there has been there's been a real campaign of intimidation against some members, and a suggestion that there'll be a strong campaign run against them if they support this legislation. But I was interested in a poll that just came out recently, a Gallup poll, that said that whether people opposed or not supported same-sex marriage, fully 3/4 of the country believe that same-sex marriage is going to become the standard in this country. So those who oppose it in Springfield and elsewhere are really trying to hold back the tide of history here, and it's only a matter of time when I think that tide will roll here and elsewhere. So, but the ruling yesterday gives it new impetus. The third thing that happened this week was that the president unveiled a series of steps by action of the administration to deal with the issue of climate change. And these were really significant, most significant being regulating CO2 emissions by power plants. About 40% of the greenhouse gases that we emit as a country come from power plants. And the president's decision to go ahead and promulgate regulations for those emissions is a big step forward. It's sure to spur a huge debate that's already going on. It may impact on the president's nomination of an EPA director. He nominated a fine nominee, Gina McCarthy, widely recognized as a brilliant administrator and a great expert in this area. She had been, I believe, Mitt Romney's environmental director in the state of Massachusetts, but she's been held up by the Senate, and she may fall victim, I hope not, to their resistance to climate change. But we will see. But this step, combined with what the president did on CAFE standards, on auto fuel standards, it begins to move the ball in a direction that it needs to go. And time is of the essence, you know. And we all know the statistics about climate change and what's happened in the last dozen years, 10 of the last 12, the warmest on record. We know about all the weather. We've experienced it here, but certainly elsewhere. They know with the grave implications of all these changes. So we have a generational obligation to act. And then finally, the Senate is set to vote today on immigration reform. And, you know, for those who are downbeat about the lack of bipartisanship in Washington, this has been an impressive effort, and our own Senator Dick Durbin has been right in the middle of that effort. We've seen a bipartisan group of senators beat back poison pill amendments to try and hold back immigration reform. There's been a great deal of compromise on both sides, and the bill should get a substantial vote. The real question is what happens when it goes to the House, and that is a little bit less certain and a little more concerning for those who support immigration reform. And it goes to the fundamental structural problem we have. There are many, many members of the Republican caucus in Washington who will never face anything but a primary. The core of their constituency is opposed to immigration reform. There's a nativist strain in that party, and it's reflected in their opposition to immigration reform. And so even if a majority, and Speaker Boehner has said that he will only move a bill that has a majority of the majority, the so-called Hastert rule. There's undoubtedly a majority of people in the U.S. House who would support immigration reform. Whether they get a chance to vote on immigration reform, or at least immigration reform that includes a pathway to citizenship, I think is a very open question. So what's going to happen, I believe, is that they may pass something that will be maybe just border enforcement, just a bill to get immigration reform to conference. But even that is now being resisted by by the opponents of immigration reform because they don't want the bill to go to conference. They don't want to advance the process. And so they may oppose it. One of the really shocking things that happened in the last couple of weeks is that a farm bill was defeated in the House, and it was defeated because some of the members of the Republican caucus insisted on very draconian language relative to food stamps. And when the bill came up, this group voted against it anyway. So they ran the Democrats off the bill, and then they didn't support the bill themselves and embarrassed the Speaker. The Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, spoke for the killer amendment, and then the bill failed. So, you know, whether the House can get its act together on immigration reform is a concern. You know, I'm hopeful. I think this is the best chance we've ever had. What's going to happen in the Senate today is impressive. But it speaks to the structural problem we have, and this probably I get a debate from President Cullerton, because we're the beneficiaries as Democrats in this state of redistricting. We control both houses. We've got a Democratic governor. We gained 4 seats in the House as a result of it in the last election. In many other states, the opposite was true. In North Carolina, Democratic candidates got 52% of the vote, I think, and they got 27% of the seats. And this story was repeated elsewhere, and these districts are drawn for that purpose, and they tend to be homogeneous, and so you get the effect that I said before, which is that 80% of these members never face a general election, never have a contest outside of their own party. So they're constantly looking over, if they're Republicans, their right shoulder, worried about Tea Party challenges. And that's created a very destructive dynamic in our politics. It's created gridlock. It's created a lot of cynicism on the part of the American people about whether Washington can get things done. So that's on the downside. On the upside, and this is where I want to finish because I want to get to your questions. Despite all that, I'm optimistic about the future, and and people sort of raise their eyebrows when I say that, but I'm optimistic about the future because of young people. When I left the White House, I decided that what I wanted to do after the campaign in 2012 was start an Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. I wanted to do that because I want to encourage young people to go into the public arena, to become candidates and advisors and journalists. And you know, what I find is, and I think many of you may have the same experience. When I talk to young people today, I think they're the most public-spirited group of kids that I've seen since my generation was very active in the 1960s and 1970s. They believe that they have a responsibility to make the world better, to change the country. They believe that they need to dictate the kind of future they're going to have, that they can't simply depend on others to do it. But they're very skeptical as to whether government and politics is the way to do it because of the spectacles that we've seen. The spectacles we've seen in Washington and frankly some of the problems we've seen in Springfield and other state capitals. We've seen it all over the country, the kind of polarization, the gamesmanship that stops progress from happening. But my message to these young kids is the same wherever I go, which is whether they participate or not, the decisions that are made, and you could see it this week in Washington, in Springfield, in city halls and county buildings and in foreign capitals all over the world, they're going to be made whether these kids participate or not. And every equity that they care about, whether it's climate change or human rights, or, you know, for our Republican kids, whether it's deficits, and all these things are going to be dramatically impacted by the decisions that are made. And they either participate and try and steer this country in the direction they believe it should go, or live with the consequences. And what's been really, really pleasing, and my colleagues from the IOP can attest to this, we've been open since January. The degree of participation, we don't give credit, this is a extracurricular activity, and these kids have a heavy load at the University of Chicago, so they got to be serious if they're going to apportion some of their time to something that isn't going to help them graduate or advance their degree. And they've come in great numbers. We've had 160 speakers since January at the IOP. We've had forums on issues like gun control, women in politics, technology in politics. We've had speakers like Elie Wiesel. Tom Brokaw led that gun panel. Some of the most prominent journalists in America have come to the Institute to help us lead these discussions. We've had smaller, intimate kinds of interactions between the kids and people like Jerry Brown and Jeb Bush that have been really candid and interesting. We have a core of visiting fellows each quarter. Last quarter, it was former Senator Gary Hart, Steve LaTourette, just left as a congressman from Ohio, Republican, John Favreau, who I always hesitate to say recently retired as the president's chief speechwriter because John's 31, and using the word retired seems inappropriate. But Chris Liu was Secretary of the Cabinet, Haley Barbour, and Bethany McClain, who's one of the leading financial journalists in the country, and they held study groups every week during the period that they were on campus in their areas. And kids faithfully came. The exchanges were great. They brought guests. Bethany brought Tim Geithner to one of her sessions. And so it's been a great experience. And this summer, I just got back from Washington this morning. Last night we had a reception. We have, I think, 85. How many do we have in Washington? 85? Well, let's just say 85. No, we have, but we have over 100 interns, but most of them are in Washington. Some are in state houses and city halls around the country. Some are working for NGOs. Some are working for media outlets. Some in government, some in the White House and cabinet agencies on Capitol Hill. So they get hands-on experience during these summers, and these are paid internships, so those who need the money don't have to sacrifice in order to participate. And I have to tell you that I am absolutely persuaded that these kids, more than a few, are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They are so bright and so well motivated, from left to right. The one thing that I hope to impart to them is that we've brought all these. I mean, I interviewed Newt Gingrich in front of an audience, and did the same with Haley Barbour and others. We're trying to inculcate them with a sense that you can, in fact, disagree and disagree sharply on issues and not disqualify each other as people who care about this country, who believe in things that are important, who have good values. This sort of sense that you have to disqualify your opponent has become very, very pervasive in Washington to the point where it makes it very hard to get things done. So we want to create a culture of respect, even in disagreement, and we're doing that as well. And one of the most pleasing things to me, I was obviously the object of suspicion among some of the Republicans on campus when I arrived, and I assured them that we were going to bring people from across the political spectrum. And one of the nice things that happened in the last couple of weeks was a piece we didn't solicit, but it just showed up in the student newspaper. Republicans and conservatives talking about how much they liked the IOP and how they felt that they were really getting exposed to a lot through that experience. So I invite you all to come down. Many of our programs are open to the public. I invite all you policymakers to come down and share your wisdom and experience. John, from your 50 years in politics, would be great. They're like dog years when you're president of the Senate. So, But I really urge you to come down and participate, support us if you can. Trying to raise a little money for our program as well. But I think you'll see what I'm saying. I think you'll walk away from there when you hear the questions these kids ask and you hear the discussion. I think you'll come away saying, you know what, maybe the future's a little brighter than I anticipated, than I thought. And that, for me, is a great gift. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
If you have a question, City Club E and City Club J are there. Ask them. A lot of those Republicans are supporting what you're doing because they don't want you to work against them, but that's just a Paul Green line. Coming from all over, David. Oh, by the way, if it's too far to go down to where I graduated, master's and PhD, to his institute, you can just go down the block to mine. All right. Question, unsigned. Do you think the resurrection of earmarks would mitigate the gridlock in Congress?
This is a really interesting question. One of the things my colleagues know one of the things I wanted to do was, and we didn't get it accomplished, I still want to do this, was show the movie Lincoln and have a discussion around that movie. Because those of you who saw the film or read Doris's book, Doris Kearns, who's on our board, her book, know that Lincoln used every bit of leverage he had to pass the 13th Amendment, including patronage, and very aggressively. This is an interesting discussion because we were proponents of this. The earmarks issue was a very big one because there were a lot of examples of egregious waste. On the other hand, if you talk to the leaders, and John can appreciate this, they don't have the tools they once had to try and encourage people to support things that are sometimes difficult to support. So it is a really open question in my mind. How do you strike that balance between reform and probity and governing? And I've had this debate in my own mind for some time. When I came to the state, I was a virulent reformer, and I still believe that government should be transparent, it should be open, it should be honest. But I do worry that you can reform yourself out of the ability to act. And so I don't know whether earmarks, if we had earmarks, things would be substantially better because at the end of the day, what most politicians are concerned about is winning elections and preservation of themselves in office. It's a very small group, I believe, a smaller group, I shouldn't say a very small group, that run for public office simply to do something. People want to be something, and they want to continue to be something. For a lot of members of Congress, it's the best job they'll ever have. They want to keep it. And the pressures they're feeling from, for example, on the Republican side, the Tea Party, are so intense, and they are virulently anti-earmark, that I'm not sure that you could move them with that. So I don't know the answer to this, but I do know there's a broader discussion to be had about what are the parameters of reform, and are there ways to make the system work better, and take the case of the 13th Amendment, is there something to achieving high ends through low means? I mean, that's essentially the question. So with that, I will not answer the question.
Clearly, the academic setting has expanded his non-answers. All right. By the way, for the first time, David, in the history of the City Club, someone didn't set up a question. They set up an envelope. Welcome to Chicago for all you outsiders. You may not open it now. Just an envelope.
Yes.
And we're not even in the General Assembly. This is outstanding. No place else. Okay. Moving on. Shorter answers, Dave, or even shorter non-answers.
The envelope doesn't feel thick enough.
Yeah, I know. Once the president leaves the office, will the Democratic Party shift significantly to the left?
You know, I think that I understand the impetus for the question. He's been you know, one of the things that you find when you're in office is that, you know, you have to make choices, and the choices are principled compromise in order to advance a public good versus ideological purity. A good example is health care. I know there were a lot of people, not a lot of people, but people, a fair number of people in our party who were disappointed because they wanted to see a single-payer health care system. There may be some in this room. We plainly were not going to get that. And the question became, how do you build on the system we have and cover the tens and tens of millions of people who weren't covered and bring best practices to a healthcare system that was imploding? And the president took that position. And a president can do that. The question is, will we have a president in 2016? I think if we do, that president will likely make the same kinds of decisions and will have the same impact on the party. And I don't think we have the same, right now it hasn't always been the case, I don't think the ideological forces in our party are nearly as strong as the Tea Party forces are, social conservatives in the Republican Party. They pull them way off to the right. I thought when we lost the midterm elections, I said to the president, I think the seeds of your re-election were just planted. And he looked at me like I was nuts. And it reminded me of the old Churchill story. Churchill, when he was turned out after the war, you probably know the story, said, someone came up to him and said, it's a blessing in disguise. And he said, well, it's rather well disguised. And I think that's what the president thought when I said that. But I felt like the Republican Party had been pulled way to the right, and that anybody who ran for president was going to have to pass through that toll booth to get the nomination and would make themselves unelectable. And that's what happened. I think it's going to happen again in 2016.
Building on that, we have Lois Carlson. Lois, where are you? Oh, right over there. I don't know what 17th Church means, but...
At Wacker in Wabash?
Oh, of course. I knew that. I was just making sure the rest of the people did. Question for you. Now, a little more on the spot here, okay? Hillary, isn't it wonderful? You don't have to mention the last name. Like David. Hillary said she'd like to see a woman president in 2016 or 2020. I assume it's 2016. Which woman do you see as promising candidate besides Hillary? Welcome to Chicago. You can pass. Well, you have a mulligan if you like.
Well, I could dance around that, but the truth of the matter is that I think that the best chance for electing a woman president in 2016 is clearly Secretary Clinton, and I think if she runs, she's going to be a force to be reckoned with, which is why the Republican Party is already mobilizing to try and stop her. So I think the one who was being a little coy may have been Secretary Clinton when she said that. I think she knows that as well. But I don't think she has to make a decision very soon. I think if I were her and I were advising her, I would say, stay away from all this as long as you can. Nobody's going to get ahead of you. And the minute you become overtly political, you become a target in a way that is costly. So my guess is, but I don't know, that she will run. And if she does, I think that she has a great chance to win.
We'll call that an Axelrod dance move. That's good. That's good. Okay. Carol Hoke, not a member of the City Club. If you remember the City Club, I could actually pronounce your last name. What are your views about Obama's climate plan? You answered that. What resistance do you foresee, and what progress do you see us making during the rest of Obama's term?
Yeah. First of all, I didn't know you had to pay dues to have your name pronounced correctly. That seems like a harsh policy. You guys are shameless.
It's on the application.
I think that, as I said, I think that the progress that we're going to make is largely going to be through administrative actions. I imagine there'll be a lot of litigation and wrangling around those, but I think that we will make them. The one legislative piece that I think has some promise is remedial actions or preventative actions to help strengthen communities that are subject to climatic upheaval. We've seen communities that have repeatedly been hit by flooding and by tornadoes and so on, and the president proposed a program to help retrench these communities. I think that one could get bipartisan support, but this is going to be a big fight. Listen, if all you do are the things that are popular, if all you do are the 80-20 winners, and you never risk and you never take any chance, then you're not going to accomplish a whole lot. I mean, the things that have the hardest thing to do in politics are the things that are for the next generation, because people are focused on the here and now. And so inconveniencing people in any way now in order to save the planet is not, in everybody's eyes, a great trade-off in politics. But I think that he's determined, and I think we'll get a lot done.
We have four. It's not that time of year. We have 5 questions. Good. Real quick now. Rod Sierra, American Medical Association and former WGN radio personality. Where are you, Rod? Raise your hand. Rod? Oh, there he is. I hope you understand the acronym. What is your view on what will it take 2? What is your view on what will make or break successful implementation of PPACA, which means Obamacare? PPACA.
It's a PP. I don't know what the PP means. Oh, I see. Yes, that's the full. Yeah.
So you agree with him?
I'm just trying to get my arms around the acronym. One of the things I'm proudest of is that the president took this on. And I have to tell you, it wasn't because I or any political person advised him to do it. In fact, this goes right to the point I was making before. 7 presidents had tried to do something on health reform of that scale. 7 failed. 65 years it had been going on. And we were in the middle of an economic disaster when he took this on. And we said, this is going to be politically excruciating, and you're going to have to pay a lot of political capital to do it. And he said, I know what I'm committing to. He said, but what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to take our approval rating and put it on a shelf and admire it for 8 years? Or are you supposed to draw down on it to get things done that are important? And he said, we got 40-something million uninsured. It's going to get a lot worse. The cost of health care is exploding, and it's going to get worse. It's going to bankrupt businesses, families, and the government. And he said, and if we don't do it in the first 2 years, it's not going to get done. So I'm proud of him for doing that. I always say I like him so much because he listens to me so little. But that said, I think that the news has been pretty good on implementation. The exchanges are beginning to get set up. In California, in the last month they came up with their pricing, and it was about half of what, or a little more than half of what had been predicted in these insurance exchanges. Same has been true in places like Oregon. And the key is where governors are committed to this, things are going relatively well. Where governors are trying not to help, or trying to obstruct, places like Texas, which incidentally has the highest number of uninsured in the country. It's not going as well. But I was at a conference, in fact, Governor Bush, Jeb Bush, and I were at a conference together at McKinsey a few weeks ago. And I was struck by my conversation with some of the experts there on health care, because their view was, yes, it's going to be bumpy, there are going to be problems, there are going to have to be adjustments. But 10 years from now, this thing is going to be, everybody's going to look at it and say, why did it take so long to get this done? And that's what I feel. I think we're going to have a little bit of a turbulent ride for the next year, maybe less than we anticipate, but especially in states where there's not support. But I think it ultimately is going to work, and people are going to come to see. It's still not particularly popular, which makes it all the more valiant on the president's part that he committed to it. But I think it will be in retrospect, just as some of the other major social insurance programs we've done were.
Okay, we're now down to the, pardon the expression, bullet round. Now, I know what now that you're the
That's
new...
if I don't answer briefly, you shoot me?
Yes. We still, conceal and carry, we still don't, you know. But though you're the new monster of the Midway, these are blatant political questions. You're old. This is the old David Axelrod, not the kind of measured, analytical, modest fellow we all know now. Here we go. From Bruce, you got to get more Irish in this club, Jay. Bruce Bendiger? All right, Bruce, I spelled it. Do you anticipate national ID cards for biometric information, medical information, voting information, information for legal non-citizens? Hell of a question.
Yeah, it is. I don't know the answer.
Next question, moving up. Dave Lundy, where are you, Dave? All right, I don't see you, but
he's right there.
Yeah, right there. Oh, Jesus, this is great. Now you only got 3 sentences for this one. How long do you think it will take for Republican moderates to reassert themselves in the Republican Party? Because Dave Lundy, you know, is a longtime GOP advocate.
Up there in the 49th Ward. I think that the Republican Party is going to have to go through what the Democratic Party went through in the 80s, and I think that they're going to have to lose and lose badly, and maybe lose badly one more time. Here's the problem for the Republican Party. They're probably going to do okay in the midterm elections, and the right wing of the Republican Party is going to take that as encouragement, just as they did after 2010. But the electorate is so much different in presidential elections. You know, exponentially more young people vote, exponentially more minority voters vote. The challenge for the Democratic Party is to get some of those voters out in the midterm elections, and I think you're going to see a big effort to do that, particularly in swing districts. But I think the Republican Party is still basically in the thralls of the same people who were in control of the Republican Party before the 2012 election, and I think they're going to insist on a loyalty test for the nominee on some of these issues that are very divisive and put them on the wrong side of history, and they're going to lose again. And I think after that, there's going to have to be a reckoning. But I think it may take one more drubbing for that to happen.
2 more questions. By the way, the high point is you remember what ward Lundy was from. That's impressive. Thomas McElroy, I could pronounce your name and you remember, that's why. Level 1 Global Solutions, give you a plug. Can you explain the effect of the voting rights decision on the potential future of the Electoral College?
Well, okay, you can handle it. Let me just talk about the Electoral College, though. You know, I think that there's a pretty good argument to have a national discussion about the Electoral College. It is really bizarre that we have national elections and basically they take place in 8 or 9 states and everybody else gets to watch. And that's basically been what happened. I mean, we poured all our energy resources into these 8 states, and you know that's a function of how polarized we are, but also of the Electoral College. Now, in terms of your question, you know, one of the demographics are changing around the country. I mean, my friend Mike Murphy, Republican consultant, always notes the fact that the #1 name of a newborn boy in Texas is Jose, and Texas has 3 million unregistered Hispanic voters. There's a big effort on now to register those voters. By the end of this decade, Texas could be a competitive and blue state. And there are other places. Georgia, demographic changes are moving in Arizona. So to the extent that the Republican authorities in those states take the voting rights decision as Texas just announced immediately after the voting rights decision that they're going to implement their very strict voter ID laws. So that's an effort to try and retard this movement, but I don't think that you can hold it back. I think that movement's going to move forward, and the demographic changes are going to overwhelm all the shenanigans that may be employed to try and retard that movement and keep people from participating.
Very good. To add on to that, the Electoral College is based on census, not on who's registered to vote. Correct, Ms. Wick? All right, the last question, saving it for last. My old colleague Sharon Alter, the pride and joy of Harper Community College. David, you're in Chicago now. This is the City Club, national and international. The last question, you could dodge it if you like. Explain whether and why you will support Rahm Emanuel's re-election to Chicago mayor in 2015. We stick it to him.
This looks like Rahm's handwriting. Look, I've known Rahm since he was 22 years old, and his hair is grayer, but in many ways he hasn't changed a bit. He's a force of nature, and you know, I've always believed that to be the mayor of a big city, you have to be a force of nature. You have to be, especially this city, you have to be big enough and strong enough and gutsy enough to do things that are hard, not just things that are easy. And Rahm has that. And I think, you know, when you look at things that he's done in terms of the economy, things that he's done in terms of transportation, and the things he's trying to do in education, the things he's trying to do in terms of dealing with this violence problem, he has a very good and strong record. And you know, as a resident of the city, not just as his friend, I'm proud of him, and I'm happy to live in a city in which he's the mayor. We'll see if he has a serious contest in the next election, but I think he's going to have a very strong record to run on. Wait, he gave me these notes. I want to make sure I hit it. So,
how about a great round of applause? We got some party gifts for you, David. Okay.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.